Okay, I've got the cheeseburgers. Here we go. So back to Ray. Yeah, you just still don't quite have your head wrapped around the right ideas just yet. Your swing, but I'll tell you something. Your swing's different. Looks different. If you look back, year and a half ago with the swings you first started posting, you've done a lot of work, man. You're definitely the kind of guy who has a chance to change your golf swing because you're willing to put the work in. And do I also agree with some of the other golfers that occasionally you need to get out to a range a little bit more often just to kind of like, even if you're in the midst of working through some of your motor pattern changes, you do have to start training yourself a little bit with the timing of primarily the face angle, but a couple other things too, but primarily the face angle, getting a sense of just hit a ball and watch where it goes, and then without even thinking about much, you'll start to get the timing of how that face squares up to impact. Like, it's really easy to actually make good changes in your golf swing, but when you're hitting a net, not quite understanding you're actually duck hooking it, right? You're hitting it solid and you go, wow, it feels awesome. And you go out and then you literally can't play golf because everything is a snapdragon to the left. And it's just because you haven't gotten the immediate ball flight feedback, right? So you have to do a little bit more of that. But generally, I like your process. I mean, I like the idea that you can just go in your backyard with your net and your mat and just make the reps, right? Hitting a ball. That you're the guy that has the best chance to actually make your golf swing different. So 99% of the people that show up on GolfWorks are not going to. Like, you're going to see these swing vlogs or whatever they are. People show up and they, you'll see a thread, stay active with a guy as he gets a bunch of different advice, some decent, some terrible advice, and he tries to make a couple changes, and then in 3 or 4 weeks the thread will just kind of die away, right? Because they're not going to be able to make the changes. So yeah, you have a chance to make it better, and you have made it better. It's quite a bit better than it used to be. But if you want to continue at the pace that I know you want to continue, you need to really start thinking about developing some club head awareness, working from the club head back through the hands. And we need to start getting your hands and arms to swing the golf club, as opposed to your body trying to place your arms in the right spot throughout the swing. You need to start actually swinging the club, right? So we talked a little bit about the wave, what's happening with this guy. It looks a little bit like a spiral. A lot of times when I go on my afternoon walk, I'll just be walking, I'll have a club in my hands, and I'll work on just what basically the hands are doing. And then I'll add a little bit of arms, right? And then you start moving it, putting together with the pivot. But the reason it's important, there's so many reasons why. And I know this now. I didn't know this 20 years ago. I had to work through this the hard way. I had to learn the lessons the hard way. But the reason why it's important to learn the swing from the hands backwards is because if you look at the segments, club head, hands, arms, shoulders, hips, knees, ankles, feet, all the different segments that are all blended together to create a series of, or a chain action in which force and geometry gets multiplied across those segments. It's getting increasingly more complicated as you go from the more distal segments, the more proximal segments, the ones near the center, to the more distal segments, i.e. your shoulders, elbows, hands. Club head's being the most distal, the most outside, the most near the outside of the circle. In fact, the bottom of the club head is the outside of the circle. So the differentiation from segment to segment as you work from the club head backwards is more dramatic, right? So if you look at the difference between, let's say, what the right knee is doing versus what the right hip is doing, they are doing slightly different things, but the differential between those two things is not dramatic, like it is the club head to the hands, right? Or the shaft of the club to the hands, right? Though the differentiation between those movements, or maybe even a better way to look at it would be what the hands are doing and the wrist alignments are doing versus what the arms are doing at the shoulder joints. There's just a lot more movement, right? In those wrist alignments versus what the arm swing is doing. in relation to shoulders, right? So all the speed's getting multiplied, but the range of motion is getting multiplied too. So it's very easy to make the argument, it's very easy to prove the argument, that if you know what you're doing with your hands, and secondarily your arms, so you have a good arm swing with good wrist alignments, and you basically, for lack of a better term, you know how to just slap the back of the ball with your hands and arms, but you don't have a great pivot, you can still play pretty darn good golf. You can play scratch golf for sure. Scratch golf is not that great. I got news for the grovelers. Scratch golf is not very good. I know it sounds like I'm being an elitist, but honestly, it's, if you go to a Muni that's 6,400 yards and you play from the, you play from the white, the blue tees would be 6,400. I mean, the white tees are super cupcake, but blue tees, local Muni, fairways are pretty wide, not a lot of trouble to get into, rough's not very tall, greens are pretty slow and kind of act like a dartboard, pins are not tucked. You got to average 74, 75, something like that. You'll occasionally shoot one under, but then you'll throw a couple 78s or 81s at it, and only the good ones are going to get kept. And so with the way the handicap system works, to be a 0 point something, which would be scratch, yeah, 75, go around and 2 or 3, 4 over on average. It's just not hard. You don't have to hit the ball very good. So you could just slap it with your arms. If you kind of knew what you were doing with your arms and your hands, you could play scratch golf. Certainly you could be a low single digit. That's for sure. So if you had any idea what you're doing with the other stuff at all. Right? So not an issue. That would be with a fairly good wrist alignments. Yeah, you'd built up some club head awareness. You knew how to put the club on the ball with your hands and arms. Wouldn't even have to be that high speed. Conversely, if you had a really good pivot, like a tour level pivot, but you didn't know how to use your hands and arms, you're not going to be able to play golf hardly at all. You're going to shoot a million, right? You just don't know how to locate the club to the back of the ball, because even if you move your pivot to the right spot, your hands and arms don't know what to do with the club. So because that's true, you have to build the foundation of your golf swing from the club head and hands backwards into the pivot. Because what the pivot's doing is locating, so if you look at the little micro movements here, obviously my club head would be making some kind of a signature, some kind of an arcing, rotating signature. You're trying to take that arcing, rotating signature and be good enough at that to where you don't have to move your pivot really very well, and you still get enough speed and enough precision impact to hit the ball relatively solid toward the target in the air with some reasonable amount of speed, but nothing crazy. If you want to be a super high level player, you have to move your pivot good. But what the pivot is then going to do is you're going to be able to take this micro arc and locate it at the ball in different ways, right? So if you want to be really good for the wedge to the driver, and you want to be able to hit a little knockdown push draw, and you want to be able to hit a straight one high up in the air without much of a divot, and you want to hit a little cut around a tree with a steeper angle of attack, a little trappy cut, like, you've got to move your pivot well to do that. And the pivot obviously is a force multiplier. So if you want to swing a driver 115 to 120 miles an hour and be able to find the ball afterwards and flight it through a decent trajectory window, that's when you have to have a good pivot. So if you want to play tour level golf, or you want to be like a +3 or +4 handicap, yeah, you got to have a good pivot and good hands, right? But the pivot doesn't even know what to do until you know what to do with the hands, because the pivot's going to try to locate the hands of the ball. And if the hands are doing something wrong, then your pivot's going to do something wrong to make that bad hand action functional. So this is what's happening with our boy Ray Ray. And it's kind of, and the overall theme is that it's kind of a misunderstanding of what's happening. So you end up playing this game where you're kind of hunting back and forth between trying to get good width and trying to not let over recruit your arms, and trying to figure out why your wrist alignments are bad. But your wrist alignments are bad because your pivot has tried to figure out a way to put those wrist alignments on the ball. And if you try to learn how to move your hands right. The pivot doesn't cooperate, right? So the way those things are trying to work in conjunction with the clump of the ball, your total motor pattern with all these movements is polluted. And so anytime you try to learn the hands the correct way, your pivot doesn't want to cooperate with that, because they're trying to work in conjunction to reach some level of mediocrity. And you want to surpass that level of mediocrity by teaching the hands what they need to do first with micro swings, and then your pivot will know the correct thing to do, right? So it's going to be a matter of you going back to micro swings, and there will be some small basic things I would tell you to do with your pivot to position yourself in a place where you can learn the hands correctly, but for the most part, it's just a hands lesson. And then as you lengthen the swing, then the pivot will start to do the correct things to locate that new, better hand action at the ball. So obviously, it still sounds philosophical. So if I get a chance today, maybe to make a little tiny quick video with me swinging the club, that would be probably more helpful. But hopefully I can do that. I may or may not be able to do that. But here's the baseline, and we'll keep going from there. All right, boys, I'm gonna go have my double doubles. Talk to you guys later.